Hello again, and welcome to the 21 October edition of Portsmouth This Week, the voice of Portsmouth Town Hall. Our very special guest today is Rhode Island Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea. Welcome to our program, Secretary Gorbea.
Thank you, Doug. It's wonderful to be here.
We're honored to have you on the show.
Yeah.
Before we get into talking about the upcoming elections, I wonder if you could give us a little bit of your own background, and also how did you become the Secretary of State?
I was originally born and raised in Puerto Rico and went off to college, like many of my classmates senior year, and met a guy at my college in New Jersey who was a grad student. And that grad student eventually got his PhD and got an offer from the University of Rhode Island's Graduate School of Oceanography. So by the time I had finished my master's in public administration and then we got married, he had a job, I didn't. So I moved to Rhode Island and started immediately getting involved in the community because that's what I've always done. And it's also a great way to meet people. I mean, my family was still in Puerto Rico, his family's from Washington State. So I got involved, and one thing led to another. I was very active in starting the Latino Political Action Committee. And one of the candidates that we had supported eventually said, I'd love to have you come and work with me as Deputy Secretary of State. And so I worked as Deputy Secretary of State for 4 years under the Secretary Matt Brown. And from there went on to become Executive Director at Housing Works Rhode Island, which works on affordable housing issues and the economy. And finally saw that this was an open seat and decided, I've run that place before. I think I could do a really good job, and I'll make my case to the voters. And it was a fairly significant upset. Nobody really thought that, my opponent had 3 times more money than I did and had a lot of establishment organizations backing him. But I really believed that if I could take my message to the voters, that they would see that I had the right kind of background and qualifications to get the job done.
Well, I'm delighted you got in there. Yeah. I think you've been doing a fantastic job so far.
Thank you. Well, and I think what's really important about that story is, despite what people might think, really your vote really matters. Because the most common thing that people said to me all throughout after the primary to the general election was, "Congratulations, Nellie, you won. I honestly voted for you, but I didn't think you were going to win." And so if all those people who didn't think I was going to win had not voted, I would not be here having this conversation with you.
And that's a real message for this upcoming election
absolutely.
As well. Aside from elections, you have a lot of other responsibilities. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what is your job?
So literally I am the Secretary of the State. That has historically been kind of like a filing cabinet with 4 different areas. We have elections. I am the chief state election official, but my elections duties are limited to the central voter registration system and preparing the ballot. Actual election day is handled by the State Board of Elections along with the local boards of canvassers in every community. I also have the business services operation for the state. So whenever a company gets started, they come and incorporate with the Secretary of State's office. And so we have a lot of programs and resources for small business people who are trying to grow their business or start their business here in Rhode Island. Transparency and open government is a big area as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I was able to pass lobby reform legislation, and because lobbyists have to register with my office, and we really significantly tightened that. Open government, we have the open meetings portal, which is basically has all the information of any government meeting that's held in the state, whether it be at the local level or at the statewide level, has to be posted with the Secretary of State's website. And finally, the state archives and the state library, which have incredible treasures of Rhode Island history. And so my whole mission really is to make sure that with all of these resources, that we make sure that government is working for people and that people feel that government is working for them. And so really turning it into a hub of information for people as opposed to just sort of a sedentary filing cabinet.
Yeah. Well, I notice we'll talk about this in a second, but there's a ethics referendum on the ballot this year. Did you have anything to do with? It seems like it would be a nice follow-on to your lobbying legislation.
Yeah, no, the beauty of these areas is that you don't have to take everything on. And so, no, that was really very much the initiative of Common Cause Rhode Island and some of the other civic groups in the state. I'm very supportive of question 2 for sure, but it's great to see it on the ballot.
It is. I agree totally. Last week we had a program with our own town registrar of voters, Jackie Schultz, and she actually demonstrated we had to actually put a pretend ballot in the new machines. She also noted several new sources of information about voting. This voter handbook that you folks sent out to everybody, I guess, in every resident in the state of Rhode Island.
That's correct.
It's really great. It's filled with a lot of stuff. The thing that I like particularly is it had this little thing in the back that you could fill in personally to, kind of give you a cheat sheet when you go in to actually vote for the ballot.
So I like to say when people talk about the ballot and the elections that elections are not a pop quiz. We give you the questions ahead of time.
Yeah.
So please, please, please go to vote.ri.gov and look up your sample ballot. Especially this is particularly important this election because we no longer have the straight party ticket or the master lever, if you will.
Click the button.
And so you really should go through every single race and make that choice. And I think for some people, they might say like, oh, town clerk? I don't know what a town clerk does. How do I choose? In the voting booth is not the right moment to do that.
Right.
You have to do it ahead of time. And so again, you can look at your ballot very easily on my website. You can do it on your phone while you're waiting for grandkids to come out of their soccer game or you're in line somewhere. Just vote.ri.gov and look up your sample ballot.
Yeah, that was another one she mentioned. I immediately went home, went on to it, got my ballot.
Yeah.
Very impressive. And again, how did this come about? These were all initiatives that basically came out of your office. So how and why did these happen?
So when I ran for office, I pledged to Rhode Islanders that I would make sure that elections were fair, fast, and accurate. At the heart of it was the fact that our voting machines were incredibly outdated. They were cutting edge. We were ahead of the curve nationally in 1997, thanks to the work that then Secretary Langevin had done. But we'd fallen behind, and we had machines that were really breaking down. So I pledged that I would work on this, and I worked very hard on my relationship with the governor and the General Assembly, and they supported me on this. And so that's why we have new ballot scanners and voting machines throughout the entire state. And some lucky communities, 57 precincts, will have electronic tablets for their voter registration. So for their electronic poll books. So when you come in, they will check you off not on a binder with like all sorts of pages, but rather on a tablet.
Okay.
So that's a pilot program.
So we're coming into the 21st century then.
We are.
Gee, that's really great.
And it's all about making it easy for people to go through and vote.
Yeah. And I think they can be well equipped to vote by going through some of these questions in that book beforehand.
Yes.
And then you go in and you know what you're going to do. One presidential candidate has complained that our national voting process is somehow rigged. Is voter fraud an issue in Rhode Island?
Not that we can see it. In fact, nationally, it's not either. There are very, very, very few. I think there was a recent study that talked about 1 billion votes and only like 31 instances of actual voter fraud.
That's what I read too,
And so, no, what we have is the challenge of getting people to go and vote. And so, we've been at the Secretary of State's office, been really insistent on telling people about, mail ballots, emergency ballot. We're right now in the emergency ballot time period. If you think that your election day might be complicated or there's a big project that just loomed up at work, you can go to your city or town hall and say, I'm not going to be able to vote on November 8th. I'd like my emergency ballot. And vote right there and then.
And that goes right till the 7th, I believe.
That goes up to the 7th. That's correct.
Okay, yeah. I think this is great. I know low voter turnout has been a problem in the past. The primary, for example, was fairly low, I guess, too, right?
Yeah, no, it was. But a presidential election like this, in 2012, we actually saw 62% voter turnout. I'd love to see it be much more than that, of course. Yeah. I will say this, if for some reason you did not register before this presidential election, it's already too late in Rhode Island to register to vote for your state ballot. But the national, the federal, the presidential race, you can actually register that same day and vote at your city and town hall. So if you have a child who didn't get their act together and then suddenly feel, hopefully you can convince them to come out and
It sounds so familiar. Sorry.
to come out and vote, you can take him or her to city or town hall, and they will vote on a presidential, vice presidential only ballot and register at the same time.
Well, that's something good to know too, as well. I particularly think in this election is very important, I think, as we go forward here. And I guess the problem is trying to get younger people, the millennial generation, I guess, to take this seriously and do some homework and get out there and really vote. And we don't care what they vote, what their vote is. The point is that you have to exercise your American right to vote to make this whole system work. So I hope people will use some of the tools that you've given them.
No, and actually for millennials, we specifically created a website for them. Again, very easily seen on your phone, because a lot of them are only on their phones. So if you have a millennial that you're concerned about, tell them to go on their phone to rivotes.org.
Well, we just saw that, as a matter of fact.
And it has a series of quick questions and answers that kind of walks them through. So if they don't know if they're going to go vote, well, why? It takes too much time. And then we have short 30-second clips from different other millennials speaking to them in their language as to why it matters that they go out and vote.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Is that also your communications person that did that?
Yes, Nicole Legacy and her team.
Yeah, she
actually,
does a great
she's
job.
fantastic.
Let me talk for a second about mail ballots. I understand that all mail ballots are mailed out of your office.
They are.
When do they get mailed, or have they already been mailed?
So we are at the end of that process, because the mail ballot deadline was actually October 18th.
Okay.
But yes, we process them as they come in, and we should in the next few days be wrapping that up.
Okay, so in other words, people have already received
their
them,
ballots, yes.
and then they've already answered them and filled
In
them out.
some cases, they have already, and in fact, if you go to the Voter Information Center on our Department of State website, you can actually see it. It'll tell you if the Board of Elections has received your ballot on their end.
Now, what happens if somebody applied for one of these or something and never got it? Can they
So-
still contact you guys?
So they should definitely contact my office as soon as possible, because we are basically after the mail ballot deadline. But if there is some incredible circumstance that happened, your local board of canvassers will work
You can
to
make
make
a
sure
rational decision on whether.
that make sure that people can vote.
Yeah.
And I believe the phone number is on is being put on the show. It's 222-2340.
Okay, great. When are these mail ballots opened and counted?
So they are actually so they're scanned in as received, so you'll know that they've received it, but they're counted on Election Day.
Okay.
So that the Board of Elections has these amazing, huge, much more sophisticated than the ballot scanners that you get at the polling places, because they have to be high volume. And though they open the envelopes up and put them in, and they get counted, and all ballots get counted. I know that in other jurisdictions that's not the case. In every election cycle, there's stories in the national media about these ballots not being counted.
All these
or
ballots
whatever.
that are laying on the floor.
That does not happen here in Rhode Island. Every single ballot gets counted. Provisional ballots get counted if they're deemed to be eligible. So that's not a problem.
Now, has there been any major increase in the number of mail ballot requests over the last year?
We've seen a little bit of an uptick. We're still kind of processing the numbers, so I'll be able to speak a little bit better in about another week or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely a lot of interest.
Well, that's probably good news, because
Yeah,
that means
yeah.
more people are interested in voting. What about our military folks? How do they vote?
So they basically, we use a special process to receive and return their ballots. It's the Federal Voting Assistance Program, and it gives them step-by-step guidance. My own brother is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and
good
did
for
his
him.
own Facebook post about, with his, sealed
ballot.
envelope, on, wanting to make sure that he exercised his right to vote, encouraging other military people to
Absolutely.
exercise their right to vote. And so our office sent all military overseas voters who had applied by September 24th a mail ballot already. So, we have to do that 45 days before the election.
Okay. So, and that includes local, wherever they're a resident of, I assume, the local.
Yeah, no, so it does include a complete ballot for wherever they're registered.
Yeah, okay, that's great. I was on the other end of that for 30 years, so. How do you get, we have election day. Everybody votes at a certain time, what is it, 8 o'clock at night or something, polls close.
Yes.
How do you guys get the information?
So it's the State Board of Elections that receives that information. It's not my office.
Okay.
But the process is this. Basically, at the end of the evening, the machines are locked down, and that as part of that lockdown, they then have, each one of them has a cellular modem that transmits a double encrypted signal to the Board of Elections.
Okay.
And then they receive the results. Now, I want to make sure that people understand there's 4 layers of security. We have, yes, the wireless transmission, but that's really convenience. It just gets them the results quickly. There's also a data stick that is double encrypted that stores the data. There's a paper receipt that the machine itself produces that the clerks then have to put in with, their report for the evening. And then there's the ballots themselves that people voted on.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that Rhode Islanders understand that our voting process is about as top-notch and as secure as you can have it in this day and age. Despite what you hear in other places,
Yeah.
elections are very local. And in Rhode Island, we have invested a lot of money, a lot of resources. There are a lot of people working on this election to make sure that your vote counts.
Yeah, I think that's a good message, particularly in this political climate of doubting everything, What happens if an election ends up in a semi-tie?
So the Board of Elections, which is this nonpartisan board, is actually charged with looking at those particular situations that come up, which is really great, because unlike other states where it's an elected official that then has to decide, I think Rhode Island has a really good system with this being a nonpartisan board.
Yeah, it's it's just always interesting seeing this thing roll out. Everybody's so anxious to get the word back. But I think the system sounds great to me, almost as foolproof as you can make it.
But pretty much as much as we can.
Yeah, that's great. Write-in ballots. Mm-hmm. Can you just write anybody's name in, or
you can?
You don't have to be registered.
And that is an actual vote. No, and that's fine. And our machines are very sophisticated in terms of being able to read the write-in names. So you can. If you're really upset and you want to write in your own name, that always happens every election cycle.
Yeah, I see. We have one candidate, I believe, up in Providence he didn't make it through the primary, but he's trying to go again with a write-in vote. Are write-in votes really a kind of a wasted vote, would you say?
No, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think, every vote
It seems like you'd need the numbers of people to do that.
No, it's a hard thing to win. I don't know of any write-in candidacy that has actually succeeded.
Yeah.
But certainly, a write-in vote is an actual vote, and it's part of, that record of that election cycle.
Okay, so it all counts somewhere.
All counts.
Okay, that's great. Is there any other data that you guys collect from the ballot results?
No.
Like no demographic stuff or anything like that?
None of that. No.
Okay.
No, that eventually when we move everything to electronic poll books, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about at what times people went to vote and things like that.
Yeah.
But no, the vote is very private.
That's good. I think people need to be reassured about that in this day and age, particularly. Let's talk about referendums for a minute, because we've got, in our case, we have 9, I believe, on our Portsmouth ballot.
Yes. So
7 state ones and 2 of our own. Why are referendum questions needed, and how do they get on the ballot?
So this is the great thing about elections in the United States. They're very cultural and based on the history of every community. So what we talk about here is different from what happens in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Texas, Washington State, Florida. In Rhode Island, the group of people who settled in Rhode Island, Roger Williams and Hutchinson, we were speaking of, we're very concerned about there being control over the population. So they were fleeing Massachusetts, where there was a less tolerant group of people in charge and wanted everybody to do things lock, stock, and barrel. So one way that you prevent that is by setting up a government where the people are really in charge. And so our Rhode Island Constitution requires that for certain questions, like the expansion of gaming or other issues like the ethics one that we're talking about, which amends the Constitution, that the voters be asked. And same with some of the bond questions. So that's why we have referendum questions.
Okay, and that would explain then why the Tiverton casino is number one on the first referendum.
Yeah, by the way, the numbering is determined by the date of passage at the General Assembly.
Okay.
So it's not our office that decided to give that particular question number one.
Now, I assume in Tiverton, their ballot is also going to have another one about the casino.
That's right. They have a number 8, so they have to pass, for the casino to pass, it has to pass statewide and by the local community.
Yeah, I liked the ethics. I had to read it 2 or 3 times, especially the second part. It proposes to amend the state constitution, which I guess you had to do, to restore the Ethics Commission jurisdiction over the General Assembly. What confused me initially was there was a second part of that, and until you read it carefully and see that what you're doing is adding that sentence that's underlined, which puts the Ethics Commission kind of back in charge even during the time they're in session. And that's what's changing, I guess.
That's right. So people will see an entire piece or excerpt from the law, but not everything's being added. It's only the underlined text. And then if there's a cross through something, that's being deleted.
Right, and that's what I think confused me at first, because I read the thing and I said, what?
Well, we're always trying to figure out ways to do things better, so I'll make sure that that's better explained in the next one. But we did try in the referenda guide to make things as plain as possible.
That was great. Absolutely. It was perfect. It gave me a lot of good information. Questions 3 through 7 on the referendum are talk about the issuance of bonds. I'd like to ask you how we can make sure those bonds are used like they're supposed to be, but I don't think you have an answer for that. I
think the bonds themselves, do have to be used for the purposes that they're allowed for, and that's where you have law, legal counsel, and everything comes into place. I think one of the things that we tried to do in this referendum book is to explain in plain English what a bond is. It's kind of like when you do a mortgage on a home, or you borrow, for your education. So they're investments for capital type projects. But we also try to give people a sense of, we've used these before for certain things. So the environmental bonds give examples of, there's a piece of
things that you did,
bikeways.
Have been used
so people can decide, oh, okay, I get it. Like, all right, yes, I want to support this, or no, I don't want to support it.
Yeah, I think in looking through them, personally, I think they all make sense. It always seems like a lot of money, but then things are getting more expensive.
And there are people who actually determine, and I know the governor is very concerned about the debt ratios for the state. So there are people in government that worry about, how much bonding can you do in a given election, and look at what's outstanding, what's been refunded. So I do want to let people know about that, because that is a question that people have sometimes.
A little bit off this, but does the state have a bond rating?
Yes, actually by all of the rating agencies.
Okay, because in Portsmouth we got a AAA bond rating, which is absolutely great, I think. What is the state's bond rating?
I don't know off the top of my head, but you can invite Treasurer Magaziner, and I'm sure he'll talk to you all about that.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll give him a shot.
Yes.
We have 2 local questions on the ballot in the referendum section. Question 8 is about a bond for our new police station, which is desperately needed. But question 9 would change the position of our town clerk from an elected position, and I just wonder, it seems, I wonder why is, again, it's local history, I guess, is the way this thing works. Are there other towns that also have town clerks as elected officials?
There are actually 9 communities that have elected town clerks. And again, I think it's history, it's the culture of the group of people that set this up in their charter.
Yeah.
They might have wanted an independent, person to oversee what was happening as clerk, because as clerk you have to file all these documents.
Yeah.
So that might have been, in other jurisdictions, for example, the Secretary of State is an appointed position in New York and Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
In Rhode Island, I report to the people.
Okay.
So it's partly that, it's custom.
Yeah, I think maybe and maybe that's what's happening. Maybe times are changing here. We think we need a new way of doing this, and appointed town clerk may make some sense.
Well, there's a lot more transparency now than there used to be, right?
Yeah,
You can find
that's
out a
right.
lot more about what's happening in government, either through, cable access, or through your town's website, or through going to meetings. So I think that too helps.
And I think from a managerial standpoint, that we have a town administrator system here. You need to have all your resources somewhere sort of under your control, so it does make sense in a way. What happens if, here we get into the what if kind of things, what happens if there's some major storm or something that prevents us from going to the polls, or all electricity goes down across the state or something on November 8th?
So there are some jurisdictions that had to face that with Hurricane Sandy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Fortunately, our equipment is fairly flexible, so we would probably then just go into an emergency mode and try to put them in places that were as close as possible to people. But the machines themselves can actually save. They have a battery pack, and so they can actually operate for 4 hours.
Okay, so if we can hold it locally, then
Yep.
the results will get up there at some point because it's all stored.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, there was a controversy about people standing at the voting area, by the polls, wearing a T-shirt or something with purporting to promote one of the candidates. Is that legal, or is it illegal, or does it make any difference?
It is legal if they're 50 feet away from the polling location. So there's a chalked line that the poll workers have to make sure that people know where that line
Okay,
is.
so if they're outside that, it's okay.
It's fine. I will say this, and actually, voting activities are public meetings, and so as long as they're not wearing those candidate things inside the 50 feet,
Okay.
people can go in and just take a look and
Yeah.
come right up, as long as they're not interfering with the process. I will say this, there are many communities that still need poll workers. And on my front page of our Department of State website, sos.ri.gov, there's a form that you could click on to work at the polls. I think a lot of people would be surprised, but we need 5,000 poll workers. So I want to urge, if you have time on November 8th, and you can work from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., that you sign up as a poll worker. You'll get paid some minimal amount, but you'll be helping us, really perform a very important civic duty.
Absolutely, I totally agree, and I saw the article you had in the paper yesterday, was
Yes.
it? Talking about that, and that's something that Jackie Schultz, our registrar, also mentioned. So if there's anybody out there in Portsmouth,
Yeah,
contact
absolutely.
Jackie Schultz or the Secretary of State's office.
sos.ri.gov.
Yeah. It's been delightful having you here today. I really appreciated your candor, and I wish you the very best
Thank you.
in this election
And
coming
thanks
up.
for this opportunity.
Thank you. And we'll see you next time on Portsmouth This Week.